Now I'm sure many of you know that Fire Emblem has a bit of a reputation in Smash Bros. Of being quote-unquote overrepresented. I've even seen people joke online that Smash Bros. Has turned into Super Fire Emblem Bros. After thinking about and speculating on other possible rosters for other Nintendo games, that joke came back to memory and I thought, what if Nintendo ran with the joke and created a whole new platform fighter that was specifically for Fire Emblem? What would the roster look like? How would they handle the movesets in a franchise with so many swordsmen? What would some of the possible stages be? How about story mode? And what the heck would they even call this thing? Well, that's what I'm going to be exploring in today's video. First, let's get the short and sweet item out of the way so we can dive deeper into the meat of this hypothetical game. What the heck would we even call this thing? It's a shame Fire Emblem Warriors is already taken because that would be a fitting name for this hypothetical fighting game. A couple other names came to mind as I was contemplating this quite honestly not very important question. Fire Emblem Fighters, but that's too basic and too dull, so I'm just gonna scrap that. While Fire Emblem Coliseum or Fire Emblem Arena would handle the reference to the arena where training occurs, the names just don't feel right to me. I think if I were to go with something, I would go Fire Emblem Blades of Legend, though that honestly sounds like a TV show name. We'll go with it. If anyone else has any brilliant ideas of what we could call this, leave it in the comments. With that out of the way, what mechanics could be implemented to make this different from other fighting games? I have 3 ideas that should do the trick. If you are familiar with Fire Emblem, then you've most likely heard of the weapon triangle, the rock paper scissors style mechanic where swords beat axes, axes beat lances, and lances beat swords. Introduced in Genealogy: The Holy War and further expanded in Fates to include ranged weapons, the weapon triangle has become a series staple at this point. Though how would this be translated over to a platform fighter? I think an easy way to implement it would be when a character has weapon triangle advantage over an opponent, moves would deal additional damage, while weapon triangle disadvantage would cause moves to deal reduced damage. They could also affect knockback and hit stun if we really wanted to do that, but that would turn this game into a meta of counterpicking, and I'm really hoping to avoid that. The weapon triangle has had many different iterations, so which one should we pick? Since I have a roster in mind that pulls from each weapon type in Fire Emblem, the basic weapon triangle won't do the trick, as ranged weapons exist. Engage has every weapon type, but Brawlers would counterpick every ranged attacker. Fate's weapon triangle is cutting it close, but with 3 houses adding Brawlers, we're going to need something else. Believe it or not, the answer lies in a tweaked version of 3 Hopes and Warriors weapon triangles. So here's how it's going to go. Swords beat axes, axes beat lances, lances beat swords, gauntlets beats tomes and staves beats bows and daggers beat gauntlets, and Dragonstones / Beast Stones are neutral. Now that we've laid out the mechanic that will lead to untold amount of counterpicking, how do we counteract this? With the next mechanic, Pair Up. In Fire Emblem, Pair Up allows 2 units to occupy 1 space. The supporting unit doesn't always get to attack. Instead, the supporting unit, or adjutant, grants the Vanguard unit bonuses to their sachets such as hit, dodge, crit, and avoid. But I think Warriors Pair Up is the way to go here. In Warriors, you could press ZR and Y to have the adjutant unit perform an attack. You could also switch the Vanguard and adjutant at any time you desire. This is a good starting point, but there are still some flaws in being able to switch between characters at any time. Hopefully this approach I present helps mitigate a few of those problems. Each match, players would select 2 fighters, and the unit that is fighting at the moment is the Vanguard. As the Vanguard deals damage, a separate meter would fill up. This is the adjutant meter. Once the adjutant meter is full, you can press a button or an input to have the adjutant unit perform an attack on your opponent. But where Pair Up is useful is in counteracting counterpicks, because at any point in the match, you may switch your Vanguard unit and your adjutant unit. Though, there is a bit of a cooldown before you can be able to swap back for obvious reasons. For sense, adjutant meters would remain the same as to not overcomplicate things, but this should help mitigating counterpicks by ensuring that you have an option to avoid weapon triangle disadvantage. The last mechanic I'll introduce is the support mechanic. In Fire Emblem, if 2 units fight together long enough, they'll increase in what's called support levels, which is basically just levels of friendship. Units with higher support levels with each other haven't increased their stats during combat, and units also have support conversations, which are just little conversations with each other to help us learn about their characters. How this would work in this game is the higher support level 2 units have, the more damage the adjutant attack will deal, and the speed at which the meter is filled would increase. I think it would be cool to add support conversations, though they would probably be handled like Fire Emblem Warriors, where each pairing only has one conversation. Never mind, I lied. The last thing I'm going to introduce is the critical meter. This meter is essentially the Smash meter in Smash Ultimate, where after the meter is full, characters can unleash a devastating attack. Though this can be turned off should people not want it. It should come as no surprise that Fire Emblem has a lot of characters, and even if we were to look only at the characters that are super important to their respective stories, we'd run into a few hurdles. 1. There's still way too many for a first entry, and 2. We're going to run into the same problem Fire Emblem has in Smash Bros. Too many swords. So how are we going to fix these predicaments? Well, I think I have an idea that at least we'll be able to mitigate some of that. As a ground rule, I think for a first game in the series, pre-DLC, each game/era would be represented by 2 or 3 characters. And one side note, since it'd be difficult to balance armored units, mounted units, and flying units, everyone will be on foot. But movement speed and weight will be altered for those who fit in these categories to reference those. Secondly, we can mitigate the sword problem by looking at Fae, since some of those characters are able to use different weapons than they normally use in the game. We can use this to our advantage. So, without further ado, I present an idea for the base unlockable roster for this game. I should probably mention I'm dividing the roster by weapon type for ease of organization. Up first are our sword users. We have Marth, Alm, Sigurd, Roy, Erica, the Black Knight, and Krom. Up next are our axe users. We have Minerva, Hector, Ephraim, Ike, and Edelgard. After our axe users comes our lance users. We have Sita, Leaf, Eluwood, Azura, and Dimitri. Up next we have our bow and our dagger users. As our bow users we have Lynn, Lucina, and Claude. And as our dagger users we have Soth, Shez, and Vale. Up next we have our brawlers, and that is Byleth and Lear. Now we've got our big one, and that is our magic users. In this category we have Celica, Deirdre, Nana, Lilina, Leon, Soren, Micaiah, and Robin. And last we have our dragon/beast stones. We've got Tiki, Nyla, and Corrin. I am aware that this roster is quite large for a starting game, but I had to have it as such to give a variety of playstyles. My starting idea had even more, so I had to trim it down. With the roster out of the way, let's lay down general moveset rules. Each fighter's moveset will have the following: jabs, 3 tilt attacks, 3 strong attacks, 4 special moves, 3 taunts, 4 aerial attacks, grabs, dodges, shield. Final smash is already taken, so let's call those critical finishers, 2 combat arts, and the adjutant attacks. Future me is going to do me a huge favor by putting a little graph that shows how to do each of those. Thank you in advance. With moveset rules, roster, and mechanics out of the way, what areas could we see turned into stages? I think we could pull one stage from each game. So without further ado, here are some locations we could see as being turned into stages. The Ghoul's Teeth, Duna Temple, the Spirit Forest, the River Thracia, the Shrine of Seals, the Sakaean Plains, the Demon King's Temple, Gebel Castle, Castle Nox, the Dragon's Table, Rivers of Fate, the Roker Ruins, Gronder Field, Zaharas, and Flora Port. Lastly, you can't have a Fire Emblem game without a story, though some are better at that than others. What would this crossover story have to do to not end up like Fire Emblem Warriors, Awakening, and Fate's montage? I think I found a way that we can have many references to past games, all while having it feel natural. First, in true crossover style, I would love the opening to show us a good, powerful villain absolutely destroying our heroes. Whether it's a villain from a previous game like Medius, Grima, Ashera, Promortis, Golvig, or a completely new villain, Whatever they do, the villain better be portrayed in his absolute force of nature. Throughout the story, we would get scenes from the enemy's point of view where we would learn of their intentions. This is how I'm thinking the story would go. Following the opening cutscene of everyone being overpowered by this villain, we get a second cutscene of a major antagonist discussing their plan. Naturally, since this is a Fire Emblem game, their goal is to summon the big bad villain, though I would give them the same desires Emperor Rudolph. After seeing how each of the heir's populations rely too much on a divine being, they would give some exposition describing their attempts to sway the hearts of the leaders through their woods. But after they ultimately failed, they would decide to take much darker measures. Thus, they laid out a plan to retrieve the binding shield, capture, puppet, and drain the heroes for their blood, summon this darker being to make humanity pay for their ignorance. Now this would play as a fusion to the Subspace Emissary, World of Light, and Fire Emblem Warriors History mode. Throughout the story, as you lead your party, starting with Marth and Sita, you would be able to recruit some of the other heroes to your cause, traveling through Outrealm gates to different continents. But these recruitment options always come with a choice. You have two options, but you can only save one at a time. Say you chose the Fodlan gate, and you are presented with a choice. Recruit Byleth or Shez. If you chose to recruit Byleth, Byleth would join your party while Shez would be overwhelmed and corrupted. A storyline would present itself where Shez would join those who slither in the dark and lead a campaign against Fodlan, all while their blood is being slowly drained because of our previous antagonist's magic working on them. You would then be presented with a map where you would move around your character's sprites much like normal Fire Emblem battles. The battles would be one-stock skirmishes. Say, you get in combat with an axe enemy, you would fight against an axe character on the roster. If you win, that enemy disappears from the map. If you lose, the character you fought with dies and is unplayable unless you revive them with a Light's Blessing item, which is found in chests throughout the map. Unless you're playing on casual mode, then fallen characters are gone until you finish the map. Eventually, the storyline would lead you to recruit the house leaders and end in a battle in Zaharas, where you finally find a conduit to break the magic and recruit Shez. On the other hand, if you had decided to recruit Shez, Byleth would use their relations with the house leaders to sow the seeds of discord and cause them to turn on each other even quicker, and the story point would be to save them at Gronder and then break the magic controlling Byleth. Essentially, which hero you didn't recruit becomes a fallen hero. As you are recruiting characters, our antagonist is moving forward with their plan to retrieve the Fire Emblem. This would be represented by their sprite moving across the map, while a vial would also be on screen, representing the amount of blood that has been drained. If the antagonist ends up completing the Fire Emblem, or the vial becomes too full, our antagonist will summon the big bad, and then the next phase of the story would begin early, where our villain would go around destroying the various continents, killing any unrecruited heroes, making them impossible to recruit via the story mode, at least on that playthrough. Heroes can still be unlocked by playing the game normally, just like in Smash Bros. And that is what a Fire Emblem platform fighter could look like. Now, will something like this ever be made? Probably not, but it was a fun concept to think about. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. Is there any character whose moveset you would like me to make? Would you play a game like this? Or does the very concept of Fire Emblem in Smash or anything similar cause you anger? If that's the case, then I'll just get my fries ready. So until next time, stay blessed, y'all.